So now we're going to move on and talk about different types of quasi-experimental designs for within subjects designs. So again, very similar to what we talked about for the experiments, but now just talking about in terms of quasi-experimental. So here, pre-test, post-test. But wait, we just talked about pre-test, post-test design for between subjects. So what's the difference? What do you see here? How does this differ from what we just talked about? How many groups of individuals do we have here? We just have one. So that's the main difference here. So observations are made for one group of individuals. That's what we see here. The goal is to compare scores before and after the treatment or the event. And again, it's attempting to try to limit that internal validity. So now that we have one group of individuals, we don't have as many individual differences. There's no environmental differences because this group's all undergoing the same environment, right? So one example of this pre-test, post-test design is a researcher who's interested in the effectiveness of an anti-drug campaign on elementary school students' attitudes towards illegal drugs. The researcher could measure the attitudes of students at a particular elementary school during 1 week, and then so they measure them before they undergo the anti-drug campaign, and then they measure their views afterwards. So again, pre-test, post-test design, it's a within subjects design, very similar to what you'd see in an experiment, except for here, there's no counterbalancing, right? There's no way to counterbalance what's happening. There's the controls aren't met for that true experiment, and so the idea is that we're just kind of having there's not a lot of control that's happening during here, and there's no untreated control condition or anything like that. So that's where it becomes more quasi-experimental in nature. So was that a within or between subjects design? Was within subjects, again, because we already introduced that with the topic slide. So again, what are some problems that this design might have? Again, thinking about those threats to internal validity that we've talked about previously. We have history, those time-related influences, right? History, instrumentation, order effects, maturation, and regression to the mean. And again, some of those could be more highly affected because of these non-equivalent groups that we have. All right, so in a time series design, this is another type of within subjects design. There's a series of observations for each participant before some sort of treatment or event. So here we're looking at a study where they're looking at yearly test scores for students at a given school for several years, both before the implementation of an extended school day and after the treatment or the event. And so this is an improvement over the pre-test, post-test design because that's not able to look at long-term effects. This time series data can be further improved by including a control group. However, the design is basically its ideas like these. You have this multiple time series, right? It could be 3 here it could be more than that, it could be less than that. But the idea is that you can look at these trends over time before the event, and you can look at them after. So and it gives us more, because maybe if you just look here and here, you see a change. But what if that change was already, so what if you see an increase in test scores from 2014 to 2015? Well, was it that extended school day, or was there already a trend that continued? It started here. So you can see if it was a trend that continued, or was it flat here and then an increase in these years. And so it's very similar to this idea of pre-test, post-test, but it allows us a little bit more just to see a little bit more about what our data is showing us. So here's a study just kind of to lighten the mood a little bit. And it is actually a real study. So here what these people did was they looked at the rates of gonorrhea in terms of pre-intervention observations. And then the intervention or the event here was the increase of taxes. And then they looked at gonorrhea rates post-intervention. And yes, this was actually a study, and I'm going to show you. If you click here, it will take you to that study. And I'll show you that there was a study that looked at higher beer prices cut gonorrhea rates. And so, and basically they looked at the years leading up to a tax increase, and then they looked at the years after the tax increase, and they looked at gonorrhea rates, and they saw that there was actually a change in gonorrhea rates post an increase in beer taxes. So it's kind of a funny little study that yes, people do some interesting researchers. Now, there's also something called an interrupted time series. So here's something where the event isn't manipulated, and that's really what a lot of time series designs are. Something like a natural disaster like 9/11, a flood, an earthquake, something where your data is looked at before and after for some sort of event that happens naturally, that you're not causing to happen, like an increase in beer rates or a beer tax or something like that. So here's a kind of a classic way of writing out this time series design. So you have pre-intervention observations at time 1, time 2, time 3, time 4. Here's your intervention event that's, again, it's interrupted time series design because it's something that happens naturally that interrupts this time series. And then you have your post-observation events. So an example I came up for that was a little bit of an older study, but when I was talking about it last year, it just so happened that it was kind of back in the news or last semester I think it was, because the Joker movie had just come out. So basically this study looked at, do you remember what happened in Aurora, Colorado back in 2012? And again, if you click here, it'll take you to that a little article that's about that. So yes, there was in 2012, a gunman killed 12 people and injured a dozen others during the Dark Knight movie release, or shortly after that, the release of that movie. And basically what they did was looking at that event as a interrupted time series event. They looked at the number of background checks to buy firearms before that shooting and after, to see in the months before and the months after, to see if there was an increase. And yes, they did find an increase in that. So here's another example, and this is going to be similar to the format you're going to look at for your lab today. And so if you go ahead and you click on this, what I want you guys to do now, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to end this video very quickly. I'm going to have you guys go through and read through this, and then go back and answer these questions. So when we're looking at these questions, read through that and look and see, can you tell what the type of study was? What type of study is being done in that little scenario? What is the hypothesis? What were the variables? And what was the outcome? And I'll give you feedback and answers on the next